Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you will never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcasts on jimmyhinton.org or findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. Welcome back to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. With us today is my mom.
Hello, everyone.
Myself, and we have a very special guest. We have Abbie Schaub from the Keepers series, the Netflix series. So, Abbie, say hello.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Very good to have you with us, and I'm especially excited to have you for a number of reasons. But a little something about me that some people may not know is that, first of all, I'm a cheapskate. So my wife and I don't get things unless we absolutely have to have them. So for us, Netflix was just one of those things that I just didn't ever see a need to have it. And so I got Netflix specifically to watch The Keepers. And
so did I.
Yeah. Oh, nice. So I did the trial, and then I was like, well, if I just get the trial, I'll never get to go back and watch The Keepers again. So I'm blaming you, Abbie, because we now have the Netflix ever since we watched The Keepers.
Very good. I'll confess I did not know what Netflix was, and when the producers invited us to lunch to break the big news that they had sold the series to Netflix, I came home and called my older daughter and said, I guess it wasn't good enough to be on like a real television channel.
Oh, wow.
And there was this silence on the other end of the phone, and my daughter Kate said, "This might be a thing." So I was completely oblivious to the size and reach of Netflix. I certainly appreciate it now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we wanted to, well, first of all, we'll let the audience know. We got to meet you in person in Johnstown, just up the road from us back, when was that? Was that September?
I was trying to remember. I think it was around September, yeah.
It was either August or September. I think it was early September. But anyway, we got to meet you in person, and, it was an honor to meet you, and we've kept in touch ever since. And I've had a fascination for a long time with The Keepers. It came out in 2017, and everybody was coming to me, as an abuse advocate. They were saying, "Have you seen The Keepers yet?" Well, I didn't have Netflix, and so I kept putting it off. I didn't know that you could do a 30-day free trial. So I kept putting it off, and finally I bit the bullet, and like I said, I tried the free trial, and I got to say The Keepers was done just really, really well. It was done really well. So
thank you. Somehow, I can't take credit for that. Somehow, consistently, the right people have come along when we needed them.
Yeah, I think that's incredible. Well, we wanted, Mom and I were talking, we wanted to kind of hear the story about how you and Gemma began this investigation and what led up to what's now The Keepers. Because I don't really know that story, how the investigation turned into the Netflix series. So give us a little bit of background. What started you down this path of investigating Cathy Cesnik's murder?
Sure. This thing has always had a life of its own. We had no idea, this was going to end up as it did. Gemma and I were classmates at a all-girls Catholic high school in Baltimore City called Archbishop Keough High School, and we graduated in 1970. While we were students there, we had Sister Cathrine Cesnik as an English teacher and our drama teacher. She was one of those charismatic people that you meet. Firm with her students, inspiring sort of teacher, worked with drama, reached out to the students to try to help them if they were struggling with anything. she was just someone you felt comfortable talking to. When we started our senior year and came back to Keough in 1969, Sister Cathy wasn't there as a teacher anymore, and it was sort of unclear where she had gone or what had happened to her. In November, we had the sad news that Sister Cathy had been abducted on her way home from a shopping trip. Nobody knew what had happened to her. She was just gone. Then, unfortunately, in January, her body was found, and we knew at that point she'd been murdered. The murder was never solved, and it became a little bit of an urban legend with lots of stories going around that her murder hadn't been investigated, that there was a cover-up done to protect priests and police officers, that we'd probably never know the truth. The topic came up now and again in newspaper stories and, whodunit sort of murder stories. This whole thing started innocuously enough with Gemma putting a post on a Archbishop Keough alumni Facebook page asking if we could talk a little bit about the years when Sister Cathy went missing, what was going on at the school. And the administrator came on and said that that was an inappropriate topic to be talked about, and she deleted all the posts and, said
Wow.
that was off grounds. So one of the other Keough students, not Gemma or I, who was more techie, started a private Facebook page for Keough and Seton Keough, which had later merged with Keough, for all their students and alumni to be able to join to talk about it in a more private setting. Meanwhile, Gemma had gone back to talk with Tom Nugent, a Pulitzer-nominated author and journalist who had written a story in a local newspaper around 2004, I think, called Who Killed Sister Cathy? And she began to have meetings at her house. I had always been interested in the topic at least, so I joined in going to the meetings. And we paired together very well. We're very different people. She's an extrovert. She's wonderful at talking to people, finding out sort of oral history from people, whereas I am far more introverted and quiet and tend to hide when people come around, which meant that she was really good at being the reach-out person and the interactor, and I was very happy behind the scenes doing research, looking up land grants, old newspaper articles, tracking down contact points for people, that sort of thing. So between the two of us, we sort of made a good team. We didn't know where this was going. We began to meet people. People wanted to talk to us. And sadly and shockingly to us, in this private Facebook page that had been created, Keough alumni began coming forward one by one and began to talk about tales of sexual abuse by the chaplain at Archbishop Keough High School, who was Father Joseph Maskell, and by the director of religious education, who was a priest named Father Neil Magnus.
When did you guys? When did you and Gemma start doing your investigation? What year was that?
That was around. I think we opened the Facebook page around 2013.
Okay.
Gemma may have started, getting people together and talking to them in 2012. It had always been sort of an on and off topic of conversation.
Yeah.
We began having all the, and initially, frankly, I was a little dubious. I sort of am fact driven. And my reaction, of course, was like everybody else's. I was there. I didn't know anything about this. No one harmed me. How is this possible? Then we began getting contacts from people from other Catholic schools in the Baltimore area, men and women, that were just heartbreaking. One man I remember said, I've not only have I never said this to anyone, this is the first time I've ever written it, and I'm, upset as I sit here and look at the words that I'm trying to type.
Wow.
It quickly became clear that there was sexual abuse by the priests at Archbishop Keough High School that went on for many years, and that people were told, the school administrators were told, other priests were told, and yet the priests remained assigned to Archbishop Keough with free access to the students.
Well, yeah, obviously we saw that theme with the release of the Pennsylvania grand jury report. I think people are shocked at how much they knew and how much the priests were just shuffled from congregation to congregation. They're just shuffled all over the place.
I went to watch Spotlight before the Keepers or maybe we had started the Keepers filming at that point. And I sat there stunned because I said, Boston's story is our story, and our story is Boston's story.
Yeah.
And when the Pennsylvania grand jury report came out, it just becomes dramatically clear that all of these individualized stories of clergy abuse within the Catholic Church were not small, isolated events. Rather, there was a national and an international conspiracy that was orchestrated by the Church to protect their reputation from scandal, throwing the kids to the wolves who were harmed. After we've been doing this for about a year, we began reaching out because we were told we needed to have some wider... Well, we opened a public Facebook page called Justice for Cathrine Cesnik and Joyce Walecki. Joyce was another young woman who was abducted and murdered about 4 days after Sister Cathy, and she also knew Father Maskell. So we began to wonder if there were ties. Neither murder was ever solved, and her family felt that also information had been suppressed and covered up and hidden. It was suggested to us that we needed to have more out-of-state coverage because people who had information about what happened might not be living in Maryland, might not be on Facebook at our age, as many people aren't into tech. So we did an article with a woman named Laura Bassett, who I think was head political reporter for the Huffington Post. And I think she came into town expecting it to be a one-day short story, and she ended up working on it for months. She published an article in the Huffington Post called Buried in Baltimore that for the first time revealed survivors' names and pictures and more of the true story of what had happened. At that point in time, one of the women who was abused at Keough, Jean Werner, and her partner in a later civil lawsuit, Teresa Lancaster, came forward to our group and said who they were, and told their stories. One of Jean's best friends in high school had never known she was abused, didn't know she was the Jane Doe in the lawsuit, but her nephew was an independent film producer. And she emailed, his name is Ryan White, she emailed Ryan and said, you have to come to Baltimore and hear this story. And Ryan laughs about it now because he regularly got emails from his mother and aunt saying, here's a great story you have to tell. He'd been best friends with his co-producer, Jessica Lawson, since the 4th grade. And they had a small independent film company. They had done The Case for 8 and a documentary about gay marriage rights that went up to the Supreme Court, and a lovely little one called Good Old Frida that's about the Beatles secretary. That's a good throwback to the 60s.
Wow.
But they were not a big company. They were small, independently self-supporting sort of little company. And they came to town to meet Jean and talk with her. And they had to be interviewed by all of Jean's brothers, and get some trust established. And then they got in touch with Gemma because they wanted to meet, talk with us. And I'll admit I was the holdout. I was concerned that Sister Cathy would be portrayed as a nun gone bad, or that any of our survivors might be portrayed badly, because once something's out there in the public eye, you can't take it back.
Right.
And I was very uneasy and still am very uneasy with the idea that somebody's going to make money off the story. You have to question motives and be protective of your people. So we met with Ryan and Jess, and I frankly voiced my concerns, and Ryan talked about his aunt and how he came into the story as a personal connection to the story. I was still nervous because many of our survivors were so fragile that I could not bear the thought that they would end up hurt or might hurt themselves.
Sure.
Bad information were put out there. But Ryan told me a story that convinced me that this invisible hand that seems to have led us was at work. The abuser, Father Maskell, actually began abusing, I'm sure probably before this, but when he was still in the seminary. He was abusing young adolescent boys who were sent to a summer church camp called St. Martin's. And he was still Maskell was still in the seminary then in the late 1950s or early 60s. And he and another abuser who he was close friends with, Father William Sims, volunteered to help out at this church summer camp where they played strip poker with the boys and took them into the showers to show them how to wash themselves correctly, which of course didn't end well for the boys.
Yeah.
It turned out that Ryan's grandfather managed that church camp, and that they still had all the records showing Maskell was there in the attic of their Catonsville home. And
Wow.
I still get a little chills talking about that because it felt like there was something out there in the universe smacking me upside the head, saying, "Hey, we sent you these people. What more do you want?"
Yeah.
So we agreed to let them follow us. His idea was that he wanted to try to tell the story from two different angles. One being the pain and the destruction that was done to people's lives through the survivor's point of view, and the other through this quirky sort of story of two old ladies getting together and deciding they were going to solve an unsolved murder by using social media and networking connections. Nobody was paid to be in the documentary. That's sometimes a twisted idea that's out there. Everyone who appeared in the documentary did so voluntarily with no compensation.
Yeah.
Everyone came forward because they wanted to tell their stories. Certainly Ryan and Jess made a profit when they sold it to Netflix, but they had invested well over $100,000 by that point in time with traveling and, car rentals and hiring photographers. And,
It's expensive to film.
So
Yeah.
I don't begrudge them a penny. They were absolutely wonderful to work with, as was John Benham, the photographer they brought in. They were put in a position of going into strangers' homes and asking them to bare their souls.
Sure.
They were always trustworthy. They were warm. They always honored any commitments they made. They agreed not to share information if somebody changed their mind. It just sort of took off.
Well, I got to say this, Abbie, because you're talking about this, and you talked about your hesitancy to be protective of the survivors. I was reading reviews on the keepers, and the reviews are just, off the charts. Really, really, really positive reviews. And one of the things that the critics said about the Keeper series is that they expected that something as emotionally charged as this, there would be some sort of a bias that would come out in the documentary. And the critics come back and they say, we don't find that bias in this documentary. And they said, it's so open and so objective. And, I commend you guys for that, because it's really hard not to come off as forming a strong opinion, as you're going through this.
That's all Ryan and Jess's. We had no idea what they were doing. They wanted to. We didn't see the documentary until it came out either. We didn't know what was in it. We had no idea of the work they were doing behind the scenes. They wanted to follow the story, but they didn't want to be part of the story.
Yeah.
And they were very ethical. They gave everyone whose name was mentioned an opportunity to appear in the documentary if they wanted to, so that it was fair, that both sides had an opportunity to make statements. The Catholic Church, of course, declined to participate with any live interview. They did agree to answer a few questions. and now they're complaining that they weren't included in the documentary.
Yeah, go figure.
Did our best there. They were just, yes, we began to have hundreds of people coming forward who had known Sister Cathy, who had known her roommate, Sister Helen Russell, people who had loved her, people who were abused, came forward, not because they were looking for attention, but because they wanted to try to help us. And what seems like it would be a dark and grim sort of thing actually had this lovely, warm sense of kind people getting back together to try to help people who were harmed and to try to figure out who hurt Cathy and Joyce. And certainly there were dark moments, and certainly it was stressful. But it's always been a labor of love. It's never been for revenge or a hunt for blood or, that sort of angry thing, although people have every right to feel angry. The story just kept unfolding.
That's one of the things that I wanted to ask you. One of the things that came to mind, because I get criticized a lot because of my work in advocacy, and I have no problem calling churches out, and if leadership is covering for an abuser, I call it what it is. It's a cover up. And they don't like that I use that language, and they'll come back and say, we're not covering up abuse. We're giving this guy a second chance. And I was like, you can put all the lipstick that you want on this. It's still a cover up.
Pastoral duty to forgive.
Yeah. So, one of the big criticisms that I get is, well, you hate the church and you just want to see the church fail. And I think that's it's a pretty odd thing to say to somebody who's a pastor. So
I got into that same thing, and I've always tried to make it clear that almost everyone involved in this documentary was raised and taught within the Catholic Church. We went to Catholic schools, we went to Mass. Cathy's friends who were in the documentary were nuns at some points.
Yeah.
This has never been, I know it sounds odd, but this has never been anti-religion nor anti-Catholic. I have great respect for the value that religion and faith hold in people's lives, the richness that it can bring.
Sure.
We're not protesting dogmas or sacraments or beliefs. The only thing that we're protesting is children being raped.
Sure.
And I think that, and I expect that good, faithful, devout Catholics will be on the front line of this with us.
Yes.
Because we're not fighting to take the church down. We're fighting to save the church.
Yes.
Because it is going to go down if they don't stop this, if they don't do real reforms. In the olden days, they could talk louder and lecture people, and the parishioner sort of went off and said, well, yeah, they must be right, and our duty is to be obedient. But this has gotten out of hand. When I researched it, you were talking about this view of giving people a second chance. That's how this started out. I think earlier theories decades ago was that this desire for children, for younger ones, for illicit sex, as it were, was a vice like gambling or drinking, and that people could confess it, and the church's duty as bishops was to forgive the sinner and help them get started in a new life. Unfortunately, they went off the track. It looks like around 62, there's a letter that was sent out to all the parishes around the world, signed by Pope John XXIII, that's a couple pages of rules on how to deal with sexually abusive priests. And it includes the idea that anyone who has information of the internal... You okay?
Yeah. We're still here.
That anyone who has information of the internal church process is sworn to secrecy for the rest of their lives on pain of excommunication, that they're never to talk about the priest's name or talk about charges against him. That priests weren't removed from the clergy. They were, at that point in time, they thought you could go to a rehab place and be talked out of this and given a new start, like you wouldn't put someone with a drug addiction back in the same community because they would get lured in again. Unfortunately, they did this over and over and over again, and this impenetrable veil of secrecy led to them protecting and enabling abusers. It got out of hand.
Yeah.
They got confused. They thought that their duty was to protect the church from scandal, and their definition of scandal is not our definition of scandal.
That's right.
Their definition of scandal is anything that makes someone question their faith. So in some cases, when survivors went to bishops to say that they were being sexually abused by clergy, the survivor was told that they needed to go to confession because they were committing this mortal sin of scandal by opening the door to having others question their faith. And this was all your fault. So yeah, I don't have any. I have the luxury of being able to distance myself because I wasn't harmed. So it allows me to have a little, allows me to have a little different perspective.
Right.
But I think I would, the story is so painful, and it's just one story of thousands across the country. This happened in schools and churches and parishes all over. I think that the church has to do real change. It has to make a public confession. It has to stop the secrecy. It has to stop treating this as a sin and treat it as the criminal act that it is. They've covered this to the point where they've become an actual criminal conspiracy. They've moved known abusers across state lines and allowed them to harm children in other states. They've shipped them out of countries so that they wouldn't be apprehended, and they've gone on to abuse children in other countries. And it's not just America. When you begin to step back and look at the scope of this, it is an organized criminal conspiracy, and it has to stop. We came out of our story saying, how do we make something good come out of this? It can't just be all pain and all this terror that's happened and continued, and we walk away from it.
Well, and I want to commend you guys too, because I think by you just shining a spotlight on this, the cockroaches are starting to to squirm, and we're finding them and they're running. And I think were it not for the Boston Globe and their spotlight series that they did back in 2001 or 2002, were it not for that, just being the beginning of this, to uncover this level of abuse and cover up.
And I'm not particularly religious. It really has felt from the start that there's some invisible hand at work that wanted our story to be told and brought in all these hundreds of people to make that happen. Gemma and I are reasonably intelligent women, but we're not any big brain trust, we wouldn't have engineered all of this. Something out there wanted the story told, and used us perhaps to make it happen. And it's my sense that the story was told within the same general time frame as Spotlight, and then the Pennsylvania grand jury report coming out, and John Doherty and other brave survivors from there standing up, telling their stories, and saying no more. No more children can be harmed. This has to be stopped. This has to change.
Well, and
unfortunately, state laws are engineered to protect the church as well.
They are, but I think that's changing too, and I'm seeing not just here in Pennsylvania, but across the board. You have survivors who are standing up, and they're meeting with legislatures, and they're saying, we've got to change laws that stop protecting institutions and that start protecting the victims of abuse. And Rachel Denhollander, I think, has just done a fantastic job of rounding people up, and Sarah Klein. They're being change agents in the government, and they're coming back, and they're partnering up with senators and saying, we've got to rewrite the laws that actually make sense, and it's happening, and I'm encouraged by that.
Yeah, I am too. They did change some laws in Maryland. They extended the age limit on the statute. After the keepers came out, the legislators were so embarrassed, they did extend the statute of limitations in Maryland, basically a time frame when people are allowed to file civil lawsuits from the age of 25 up to 38. But they changed the wording to protect the church from civil lawsuits.
Wow.
So yet again, that was a double-edged sword. They said they only passed it with the wording that somebody suing has to prove gross negligence against the church. And in Maryland, you can't prove that. It means not only did they know what was going on, they didn't care.
Wow.
A drunk driver can't be found guilty of gross negligence in Maryland.
Whoa.
Wow.
So that's a pretty well impossible standard. But the age did get changed. Some laws in Maryland did get changed. In particular, the law that only one person can testify about sexual abuse in a trial, which is the reason they claimed that Maskell couldn't be sued or couldn't be charged, has been changed so that if it's a minor involved, they can allow testimony from other people who were harmed. They changed a law saying that people don't need to prove physical resistance to have charges of rape filed anymore. And rape kits now are being kept for 20 years, which was not the case before. So there are changes. There are big social changes. I think we showed people that they aren't alone in this, which allowed more victim survivors to feel safer coming forward and speaking. And as more and more of these names come out, more and more people feel empowered to come forward. We're still just seeing the tip of the iceberg.
I think too. Yeah, I think definitely.
There's more to come. I'm proud and pleased of what we did, but I can't take credit for it because it just feels like all these people came together and wanted this to happen and made it happen. And I hope yet to wrench something good out of it. We haven't given up entirely on solving the murders. There's still a little bit of hope. We know it's unlikely, but there's a little bit of hope that new forensic DNA techniques that may help, that someone might come forward with a confession. Unfortunately, Edgar Davidson, one of our men of interest in the murder, died a few weeks ago without any deathbed confession.
Wow.
Which was a little disappointing, but it's always by sense that fate or destiny, either we're going to make this happen or it won't, and it's not really in our hands.
Abbie, I want to commend you as I'm listening to all of this for your persistence. You keep on keeping on. You keep your cool, and it's like you're taking very steps forward. You are constantly taking those little steps that eventually lead to the journey, so to speak. And when you talk about all these people coming together, I think that's important for everyone to hear, because it all begins with one person, and then one person linking arms or hearts, whatever you want to say, with another and another and another and another. And I think that's why Jimmy and I are so excited right now at the time in which we're seeing all of this come together. It is just super exciting to see so many arms and hearts linked together and to see the changes that are taking place. I'm just super thrilled about all of it. And it's because of people like yourself, who have had the courage to take that first step, that very first step. So I want to thank you personally for that.
Thank you. Like I said, I wasn't harmed myself, but I am angry at what I think is the cover-up of Sister Catherine's murder, and I am angry that what actually made me the most angry, and people have to watch the story, because even they did over 700 hours of filming, and they had to cut it down to 7.
Wow.
So there was lots of the survivors and stories that had to be cut out because it gets too confusing, to keep putting a lot of different things in there. But it just, like I say, it just feels like for some reason this story wanted to be told now. And I have the luxury of not being in pain when I talk about the subject. But what I am most angry about is that you had these large groups of people who are in positions of responsibility to protect youngsters in their community, not only within the church, but within the state, too. I believe the state's attorney's offices in the past have declined to prosecute the priests as part of this conspiracy not to have scandal. There was no reason Maskell shouldn't have been charged There's no reason
right.
a lot
Right.
of these other priests shouldn't have been charged. But when you look down, I think we found maybe 3 priests who were charged out of about 80, maybe 88 that the Archdiocese of Baltimore has announced. I think they were just given passes. The church said, we'll take care of this. It's better if the person is spared from the trauma of testifying, and we'll, make a settlement, and we'll take care of the priest. And they went along with it. So I hold them accountable, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely true.
Well, we had, I think 2018 was one of the biggest shakeups. Well, I guess in the wake of 2017, when The Keepers was released, in 2018 we saw not just within the Catholic Church, which I think is just phenomenal what has happened, that began with the Pennsylvania grand jury report that was released in August. We have, I think now, I think it's 45 states now that have opened up investigations into the Catholic Church. It's just an unprecedented number of investigations where people are digging, but it's not just the Catholic Church. Within the Protestant churches, there were tons of stories that broke in 2018 that were massive. I mean, massive cover-ups. And, Sarah Smith with the Star-Telegram wrote her report on the independent fundamental Baptist churches, and it uncovered, basically a similar cover-up. It spanned 40 states and Canada, and you had hundreds of churches that were covering up abuse. And these weren't just, minor allegations. These were very credible allegations, and they chose not only to not report, but they chose to shut down the victims and threaten them that if they keep speaking up, they're going to be kicked out of church. So I guess my question to you is, we're heading into 2019. It's just a continuation of 2018. Where do you see this all going? Just in your opinion.
In terms of our story, I see it hinging on the Vatican's action or inaction. They're having meetings in February. If they continue to refuse to acknowledge their complicity and refuse to change their laws, I think they're going to have diminishing financial support and, fallout from around the world. I think they can save their religion by just being honest. We made a mistake. We won't do this anymore. Release all the old records. Be honest. Grown-ups understand that even the best of us have failings. And I think people would understand that and could live with it as long as they know it's over.
Right.
Anytime you have an organization with people who are given power over children, particularly I think when it's in with religion and spirituality, where you're supposed to trust and believe things you can't see, that it's natural you're going to get some twisted people in there who think that they're standing in God's shoes, and can do what they want.
Sure.
So it's not, our story is Catholic, but it certainly isn't limited to the Catholic faith nor to religions. Any institutions with people in unchecked positions of power have the potential to get into this. We spent some time looking at the psychology of it, which sort of fascinates me. If you're going to look at preventing this, you have to figure out what causes it. Does it come from because the person was abused and they think that's how you show love to a child? Is it a psychopathic personality, narcissistic? What are the root causes of this? There's a Moore Center for the Prevention of Sexual Abuse of Children that's part of the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg Public School of Health in Baltimore that does research exactly on that. They're trying to figure out what causes people to be attracted to children and want to sexually abuse them so that they can try to figure out how do you fix it. And that's exciting to me, the hope that in the future maybe there will be more understanding and better solutions.
Well, and I think that's going to be one of the things that comes out too is, you're going to have a lot more researchers. I obviously, I'm kind of known for my fixation and fascination with that too, because we lived it. We lived under the same roof as a pedophile and we didn't have a clue. We had no idea.
That's what I was going to say. You all should get great credit. You all had to make a incredibly painful and difficult position. And you did the right thing to protect other youngsters too.
Yeah, and I don't want to say it wasn't that hard, because it was hard. It was incredibly hard.
It was painfully difficult.
I think you and I both felt like vomiting the day that we were sitting in the police station.
Yeah.
We knew that day was going to change our lives forever, but what we keep coming back to is we didn't see any other option laid out before us. And I don't understand, even if you want to protect your institution, just basic human compassion. I don't understand how these people can lay their heads down on their pillow at night. I really don't. I don't understand it. I'll never understand that.
Yeah, the Archdiocese of Baltimore, they softened their tone a little bit. They were pretty brutal when the keepers came out. They put out, without even having seen it, because it wasn't fully released to anybody, they put out a campaign called Fact or Fiction, where they basically said we were lying, that this was, fictional reports. They said unkind things about our survivors. They continue to defend themselves and say, oh, how kind and helpful they are and how sad they are, but they don't change these internal operating policies that allow this to continue.
Wow.
I think they may have some new PR people, and they've been a little kinder lately, but I don't know how they can sleep at night, and I don't know why people continue giving them money. That's our other course. We're saying to people, don't donate any money to the church that ends up in the hands of the diocese or the archdiocese. If money you give to your local parish, a percentage of that is kicked back to the diocese or the archbishop. Maybe 10%. I'm not sure the exact number. Give directly to charities that you support. Take your priest to dinner.
Sure.
Help out locally with things that you see help people. But stop donating money, because you're just cushioning them against having to suffer some consequences. They have lots of assets, lots of artwork, lots of property. They can sell off things and reach into their own pockets to make some of these settlements. And maybe when they begin to feel firsthand some real consequences, maybe that will force change. So I'd like to know, we wonder what their income has been. I just saw a notice about a Baltimore man donated $3 million to the Archdiocese to help fund a new private school that they're opening after they've closed at least a dozen schools because of low enrollment. And you just wonder what's going through somebody's head helping to build another school where children might be harmed. How is that a good thing? I don't understand people sometimes.
No, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. Well, Abbie, what would be your message to other people who are out there who are just, maybe they're frustrated, maybe they're burned out, and they've been trying to expose whether it's their own abuser or abuse within their church? What would your message be to them? Because I know, in the documentary, you guys talked about how you reached so many points where you just wanted to give up. You just wanted to throw in the towel and just say, you know what, like, what's the point? And you'd lay it down for a little bit, then you'd pick it back up again. And I'm thankful that you picked it back up again. And I think millions of people are. So what would your message be to the weary?
I think just self-care. I think you have to, everybody's wired differently. Everybody copes with things different. Everybody heals differently. There isn't any one thing that works for everybody. I think it's like taking care of someone with a long-term illness. You have to take care of yourself to be able to provide care for others. If you're drained, you don't have anything left to give. So you have to protect your own resources. And it's a good, healthy thing to step back, have some fun, enjoy life, build up your own energy a bit, rather than let this drag you down too much. And you also have to be able to keep an eye on the big picture of what's happening. This is a huge social change, and social changes take decades. I think of it as a long, ugly ground war like Vietnam, where there's going to be wins, but there's going to be losses. But you keep trying to move forward, keeping that end goal in sight. And for me, that end goal is twofold. I'd still like to know who hurt Sister Cathy that night. at least have a clue who it was or wasn't. Because it's possible she still just, she knew of the abuse, and there's concern that the abusers arranged to have her murdered and then covered it up because of police involvement and the power they were in. But it's possible she just crossed paths with some, mentally ill man that night, independent of the other things that were swirling around her. I'd like to know what happened to her before I die. And that was one of our motivations getting into it. We were getting old. I'm almost 67. We felt like our generation was the last one who knew this story, and that they would have gotten away with it, that it was hidden so well. But I think, keep courage, keep determination. My fuel is not being able to fix what happened in the past. My fuel is saying, as a responsible adult in the community, we have an obligation to protect youngsters, whether they're ours or someone else's, and that we do this by stripping the cover off these stories and ugly behaviors and getting the public to know the truth. That's been a major step. When we were making The Keepers, people thought we were just, silly liars and making stories up for attention. People do believe the stories now. They believe that there was clergy abuse.
Yeah.
It's a systemic problem, not one priest or that sort of thing. So that in itself is major change. I'm encouraged when I see the Pennsylvania survivors taking on the politicians. I think that's just breathtaking.
Yeah.
Because people in general have ignored that before. So I love that. And I would ask that if I can put a quick plug in, I would ask for anyone who was harmed or knows information about sexually inappropriate behavior by clergy in Maryland or the cover-up of the same, to send an email to Rich Wolf, who is the investigator for the Maryland Attorney General's office, who's working on this clergy abuse issue. And his email is rwolf, WOLF, at oag.state.md.us. And he'll get back to you. He keeps things confidential. He's not going to go, spreading your name or telling your story about. But every little bit of information might help move our investigation forward.
Very good.
I think the future is exciting. I think it's full of hope. I think that real change has been made, but it's not going to be an overnight thing. It's going to take years, if not decades.
Yes, I agree.
And then we're always going to have some people with, disturbed thinking or disturbed personalities who will use other people for their own purposes. So we're never going to abolish this. But I think we can force the institutions that allow and encourage it by enabling the abusers. I think we can force them to change laws and know that people are watching, so they just can't afford to do it anymore.
Yes. Very, very well said. Well, Abbie, I just can't thank you enough.
I know. I appreciate.
This has been fascinating.
It's like I've held on to every word you're saying, Abbie, and I appreciate it so much.
I could talk forever. There's so many details and odd stories, but at some point you have to try to be a little concise. The only other thing I'd like to point out is thanks to all the people who helped us. Gemma is still a ball of energy, talking to people, tracking information down. She's doing a series of podcasts talking to people more who were in or around the story on a podcast called Out of the Shadows. And we continue to talk to people, to work on this, to try to put information together, to encourage people to talk to the Maryland Attorney General's office, to help move their investigation along. They can't do it if people don't talk to them.
That's exactly right.
They don't know what they don't know. So I'm still, there were so many people who helped us, I can't even name them all, but like I said, there was just this outpouring of support and love and warmth that really has been heartwarming, and I'm grateful to everyone who reached out to help us.
Very good. Well, I want to say to our listeners, if you have not seen The Keepers yet, go out and watch it. I mean, it is just phenomenal. And I think... I usually tell people to take something soft to throw at the television and maybe a little scotch. I know. It's funny because when the series ended, I was left partially satisfied and completely frustrated. And
that was one of the problems. Ryan and all had to cope with. We said, how do you how do you tell a story that, like the other murderer things that have been, how do you tell a story that doesn't have an ending?
Yeah. Well, I think it was done really well. Just because it just left you questioning everything, and I think it left the investigation very honestly where the investigation is, and and I think that for that to Ryan, and what did you say his partner's name was?
Jess Lawson.
Okay, yeah. So I commend them because they just did a phenomenal job.
They came every week for a month and lived in their uncle's house in Catesville and rented cars, and John Benham, the photographer, was a warm and lovely part of this. After they've been doing that for 3 years, they said, we really just have to stop. We have to put this together, into a story that can be shown, because we could keep coming every month for years and still not know what happened.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was well done. So to you and to Gemma, we just personally say thank you. And to our audience, we say run out and watch The Keepers if you've not done so. So, Abbie, it was just an honor today. Thank you for joining us.
I'm always happy to answer questions.
Yeah. So maybe we'll have to do a follow-up podcast with you in the future.
After we solve it.
Yeah.
There you go. That's the most.
We're going to have one heck of a party at that.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, invite us to the party because we'll come.
We're going to need a big venue.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you. I admire the work that you're doing. It feels like all these different groups and people, I think that's what social media has done. They used to be able to isolate people in stories. They can't do that anymore.
That's right.
And people are able to support each other, reach out, begin to build communities across the country that are a little harder to quiet.
That's exactly right. I agree. Well, to our audience, thank you for listening, and we'll catch you next episode. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcasts, or Stitcher. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.